Once again, a franchise has hit the reset button, and my feedback is varied.
Ready?
Let's do it, Cronkite.
Superman.
Dad? Cal?
Jessica?
Bernie?
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. Today's video is going to be a review of the new Superman film. I went to a press screening earlier this week, and for this review, I will be sectioning the video. The sections are timestamped, so you are free to click off before we get to spoilers if you are here early and haven't actually watched the film itself and don't want to hear full feedback. Given the nature of this film being a very high-profile one, and as such, I'm expecting that there will be a slightly higher than average amount of people to tune in that don't regularly follow my coverage of various theatrical releases, I do want to give a bit of context to what I prefer and don't prefer in the here and now of the Hollywood film industry. Over the course of the last few years, I have been increasingly pulling away from big corporate franchises. They have rapidly devolved into feeling more like products than they do works of art. There are often very negative stories coming out about things like directors not being given much artistic freedom to be able to present their own creative vision on various stories. VFX workers and animation artists are being overworked to such a degree that people either want to quit or do in fact go ahead and quit the industry. There are stories about big franchise films taking up too many spots at cinemas and then not enough room is left over for smaller independent films to be able to have the time and space to connect with the cinema attending audience at large. Now, some of those stories might be more closely associated with specific franchises, specific studios. If it wasn't clear, the overworked animation workers issue is largely an ongoing point of discussion regarding the Spider-Verse films. But a lot of these ongoing issues have begun to blend together to such an extent that I have become very selective about if and when I see any new corporate IP blockbusters at the cinema, where I would be using my own monthly movie pass to do so. Some films I go to press screenings for, but a lot of what I go and see are things that I am choosing to see and use my movie pass to do so. One of the talking points that has been brought up to me by viewers who leave feedback on my reviews is that for some folks, part of why they look for movie reviews of new theatrical releases on opening weekend is because movie tickets have become increasingly expensive. I know at least one of my patrons has said to me that they will more or less only go to the cinema maybe once or twice per month. So as a result, they become very particular about which films they choose to use those visits on. With that in mind, full disclosure here, overall I did not enjoy this new Superman film. Now there are some parts of it that I have positive feedback for, and we will get to those, but at my screening there were quite a few people enjoying themselves. There was lots of audible laughing at various snarky lines that are being said in the film. So if I were to give a broad analysis of who should go see it, if you saw the trailer and it looked good to you and you were looking forward to seeing it, there is of course a stronger likelihood that you're the right fit to go and see the film and enjoy the experience. If you saw the trailer and didn't think it looked interesting or promising as something you believe you might enjoy watching, then no, I wouldn't recommend going, especially if you're someone that needs to be more selective about which films you spend money to buy cinema tickets for. A lot of folks are feeling financially stretched nowadays. I hear that a lot in my comments. So if you're kind of interested, but you're concerned about money, you can always wait to rent it on VOD afterwards for the fraction of a price, or you can watch it on HBO Max, since I'm assuming that's where it will eventually land after it finishes its theatrical run, and then you can do a watch party with friends. There is a mid-credit scene and also a post-credit scene, but neither of those scenes do much in the way of setting up future films or enriching the narrative of this specific film. It's mostly just extra filler, but I'm sharing the fact that they're there so that you know whether or not there is anything else showing in addition to the credits at the very end of the film.
Did you consult with the president?
And the government tells me that I am very dangerous.
So now let's go into the less spoilers section of this review. This is where we will share broad feedback. One of the issues this film has is repeatedly interrupting dramatic tension and undermining that feeling of danger and stakes with very questionable humor. Lots of people at my screening were laughing, but it just wasn't my type of humor. Much of it came across as juvenile and poorly timed. When the stakes are supposed to be life and death, the world is going to end if Superman and others don't band together to save the world, don't interrupt that. The danger doesn't feel as real in the heat of the moment when it's being undermined with poorly timed, humorous interruptions. The material for the main trio of leads didn't really do enough to draw me in, but there were a couple of characters in the overstuffed ensemble that were offering more in the way of being compelling or intriguing, where it made me wish that I could know more about them and maybe see them have received more screen time than they ended up having. It really felt like a few characters should have been trimmed from this ensemble in order to better develop and flesh out the remaining people that make up the large list of characters in this film. Considering that this is the first film in what's about to be a new series of films that exist in the same extended universe, they really should have consolidated things more for this introduction and then gradually expanded the ensemble that may or may not cross over and appear in multiple films or in each other's films. Without giving specifics until we get to the spoiler section, the characters and performances I found to be most interesting and compelling were as follows: Metamorpho, Mr. Terrific, and the Engineer. We will give them more of their flowers in the spoiler section when I can get into specifics, but do you notice how none of the characters I just mentioned are anyone in the main trio?
What am I, a duck? No, I mean...
I know there's a lot of contention surrounding this film, but from my viewing, it really came across like a lot of storylines, themes, and characteristics were underdeveloped and half-baked. Hence my earlier point about how, in theory, if you had maybe trimmed a couple of these characters out, that would have freed up more space to better flesh out the remaining people in the story and the ideas being presented. This film felt very long. It's only 2 hours and 10 minutes, but it felt significantly longer than that. The pacing was a mess. It often feels like it's sprinting without taking the necessary moments to pause and simply let the audience sit in the more emotionally poignant moments so they could better absorb what's happening and forge that connection with the stakes of this story and the new characters we are meeting. Regardless of the fact that Superman, Lois Lane, and Lex Luthor are very large names in DC pop culture, these are new versions of them. I'm going to make a quick cross comparison to present another point about this film's storytelling and overall identity. I'm going to reference Batman because there are a lot more theatrical versions and eras of Batman on film than Superman has been able to have thus far. If you look at Batman and the larger library of various versions, you have the Tim Burton version, the Joel Schumacher version, the Christopher Nolan version, the Zack Snyder version, and the currently ongoing Matt Reeves version. And each of those has a distinct artistic style and identity that reflects the filmmakers who are telling stories for that version of Batman. Every Batman is going to have certain things that overlap: lots of money, dead parents, a bat suit with pointy ears, a lot of gear because of the aforementioned heaps of money, but even so, there are distinct identifying characteristics, the aesthetic style, the narrative focus, that reflect the artists who are shaping those cinematic eras of Batman. This new Superman, even when I was watching the trailer, I had the sense that it was potentially lacking enough of its own distinct identity visually, narratively, and thematically, but then again, that was only a trailer, so I wasn't assuming that that was going to accurately or entirely depict every facet of the film. That being said, upon actually seeing the film visually, it does look significantly cheaper than its enormous budget. It has the same questionable aesthetic that looks weirdly artificial like a lot of other corporate franchise blockbusters appear nowadays. Narratively, many of the elements feel derivative of other films, not necessarily just in reference to other superhero films, but many recent films in general. And when trying to find the distinct identifying characteristics that make this film stand out in the monotony of superhero films, or even specifically within the larger Superman film catalog, a lot of them are negative characteristics. One is the obnoxious juvenile humor. Two is the dog. This is the only one that I would actually categorize as a point in the film's favor because the dog is helping to promote the larger message of adopt, don't shop, which is a message that I hold near and dear to my heart. I adopted a disabled cat from an animal shelter, and if any of you have the means to either donate to shelters, volunteer there, foster, or adopt, you could do a lot to help out. So hopefully this new Superman film, at the very least, can keep raising awareness and galvanizing people to make a difference for animals in need. But anyway, on to number 3. It has a peculiar fixation on social media comments and social media discourse. We will elaborate more on that in the spoiler section. And number 4, this Superman film has a very weird, unpleasant attitude towards women. Lois is mostly fine, the engineer held promise, Hawk Girl wasn't given much to do besides some action, but apart from them, the film is littered with women who exist only to be objectified, mocked, degraded, or to validate Jimmy Olsen, who is very off-putting.
Can I interest you in some unconditional love? Looking for something to slobber on you? You have a weird energy.
Now let's go through some of the full spoilers. We can begin by elaborating on some of the characters that I had given compliments to earlier. Metamorpho. I did not know that this was Anthony Carrigan until he began to speak. He was a very underrated scene stealer in Death of a Unicorn, and now he has basically done the same in Superman. He is stealing every scene that he appears in. The fact that I wasn't being given anything substantive enough to be able to fully forge a connection with anyone in the main trio in this film, their material was feeling very half-baked, just going through the motions, and then out of nowhere, Metamorpho shows up in the story, and we finally got real emotional weight and dramatic gravitas. If you're watching this and you haven't seen the film, Metamorpho is introduced as one of many people whom Lex Luthor is holding hostage in what amounts to a super evil prison. Think like a CIA prison, and it exists in a pocket universe. There are several metahumans in there because Lex Luthor is a xenophobic fascist who despises metahumans, and there's also women being kept in there because this Lex Luthor is also an abusive misogynist. So Metamorpho can change his body into other substances, so once Superman is placed into one of these prison boxes, Metamorpho is also in there, and he's been ordered to turn his hand into kryptonite to keep Superman in a weakened state. And Lex has a different metahuman holding Metamorpho's baby son hostage, which is how Lex is threatening Metamorpho into doing his bidding. Anthony Carrigan acted the hell out of this. It's such a small part in the sense of screen time and this being a bafflingly overcrowded ensemble, yet I was fully connected to what he was doing. When Lex brings forth a hostage, who is a South Asian man who once gave Superman free food, and Lex kills him in front of Superman's cell, Metamorpho is more or less equally as devastated as Superman is, and it makes him finally take action. The emotional devastation he displays, listen, I need the people who are hiring actors for jobs to stop sleeping on Anthony Carrigan, because at this point, he has proven that he's highly capable, he will deliver excellence, his performance was the absolute #1 on the ranking of this entire movie, and again, he's a very small part of this ensemble. Another character I mentioned, Mr. Terrific, he was a breath of fresh air. When there were so many annoying, noisy characters and these jarring, unfunny jokes, his stoicism, this quiet, unwavering focus he had as a character, and Edi Gathegi's approach to playing him, he was so different from everyone else and stood out in a very good way. Moreover, the fact that he's very restrained and keeps his emotions hidden, when he finally does have a moment of revealing this sly sense of humor, that was really fun and intriguing to see. It made me want to know more about who this character is, what drives him. I wanted to know his life story because he was actually offering intrigue. And finally, the other character that I mentioned was the engineer. She is a villain who has had her body completely transformed and reshaped by nanotechnology. The nanites were terrifying, by the way. Genuinely disturbing and disgusting. And if they had simplified this story to just make nanite technology one of the main threats, that could have potentially worked well, because that part where Superman was throwing up nanites, that was horrific. That's what I envision when I ruminate on the fact that everyone on this planet has been poisoned by microplastics. Forget about the obnoxious humor. Just serve up some traumatizing body horror courtesy of nanotechnology.
I want to see it.
It was a bit like those beetles from the Brendan Fraser mummy films. You know, the ones that crawl under your skin? It was a similar vibe. You know, you could have traumatized a whole new generation with these nanites. But anyway, back to the engineer. She is played by Maria Gabriela de Faria. When she was cast, however long ago the announcement was, I remember going, oh, I remember her. She was in Deadly Class. I did the press line for that show many years ago. The video's still on my channel though. But I hadn't thought much about the film and specifically her casting since then. So when she first appeared in the film, it took me a second to realize it was her, because there is a significant physical transformation, but also her energy and intensity is so visceral that she was really acting circles around a whole lot of people that were above her on the call sheet. And these glimpses we get into her character, these slivers of insight, were actually interesting. Someone that sacrificed their body, went through tremendous pain to become this human / robot / whatever you would like to call her. The level of delusion and brainwashing that would lead you to willingly do that, but then once Lex keeps pushing things to the point of the world being on the verge of total and complete destruction, she's finally telling him that he's gone too far. Now he's crossed the line. Now, make no mistake, she's a villain, but there was actual dimension and substance visible in her narrative. The main issue is that, as I've already repeated, this ensemble is too crowded. So despite her being one of the ones I would select as a highlight of the film, I also have to say that simultaneously there was a lack of deeper exploration that could have been a very strong or a stronger selling point of the film if they had had the room to do that. This film needed a lot of trimming. Trim the amount of characters, trim the amount of problems needing to be solved, give the story a more consolidated narrative and a better focus. Every political concept the film attempted to bring up was underdeveloped. The notion of painting it out to be just this one cartoonish billionaire villain as being the one to be profiting off of war and running false flag operations and orchestrating the total annihilation of indigenous people and these colonial efforts to displace them from their lands. Why are you pretending that's the work of one billionaire? No, that's the entire military-industrial complex. So why are you even approaching this subject matter in this film? You're overloading this new Superman film with childish humor, but you also want to talk about false flag operations and ethnic cleansing. Please pick a lane. Who are you making this film for? And this is another problem I have with corporate blockbusters nowadays, because they so often have this air of trying to make a film for everyone, which in turn means you are going to make a film for no one. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but you get my meaning. There are a couple of cameos. Peacemaker is shown being briefly interviewed, Supergirl pops up at the end, and a fair bit of my audience was very audibly reacting with enthusiasm for these various cameos. I personally was ambivalent about them. I don't have strong feelings about Supergirl appearing simply because I would need to see more than just a small cameo to gauge what the full vision for her character is. With any upcoming DC films that are part of this new era, because everything is new right now, I will be deciding whether or not to review or watch the films on a case-by-case basis. I want to see trailers whenever they are ready to try to get a sense of whether or not they will hopefully offer more of the things I tend to gravitate towards as a viewer. A friend of mine who is very into DC Comics believes that I will really like the Clayface film, and he was reminding me that Mike Flanagan is the one who has done the screenplay for that. And yes, my friend knows me because that is a very strong selling point for me. It piques my interest. The other recurring characteristic of this film that was very jarring and off-putting in the narrative was this weird hyperfixation on social media. The notion of Superman being so in his feelings about a rude, childish hashtag was very odd. He's a superpowered alien who could quite literally fly off to all kinds of corners of the universe. And you want me to believe this grown, 30-something-year-old man is throwing tantrums over hashtags? That's the iconic superhero? And not to get all François Truffaut about this, but the auteur theory is screaming out at how one of the only noteworthy takeaways I got from this narrative is that the director is very in his feelings about social media comments. And for a film that attempts to put so much weight on the threat of things like social media and bot farms, it was yet another weird choice to have this dramatic plot twist reveal where Kal-El's parents were telling him to take multiple wives, and then all of a sudden, everyone, within mere seconds of seeing this video clip, just decide that they don't like him. Superman is an alien refugee who landed in America and grew up there from the time he was a baby. But America is also a place where there are reality shows and dramatic scripted entertainment, prestige dramas, mind you, about polygamists. The reaction and the way that it was presented didn't fully work. And this also goes back to the pacing being all over the place in this film, where the switch up from the public happens immediately in what amounts to real time. This would have worked better if it had been a montage showing a sensationalized narrative being spun across various news outlets and social media platforms over the course of at least a day or two, instead of watching people just seeing a short clip and immediately deciding they don't like him while he's standing right there. And if we're really trying to place this in the context of the audience's real world, why was no one going, oh, well, that's fake news, it's AI? Anyway, the final point I'll mention with a bit more clarification is the film's horrible treatment of women. Jimmy Olsen is inexplicably presented as being catnip to women, Women are constantly fawning over him for no reason. They don't have him say or do anything that would make this reaction make sense. It's very much just in the story to be wish fulfillment, and it's not just the lack of presenting anything that would contextualize why women apparently can't get enough of him. This Jimmy Olsen is extremely shallow and rude and off-putting. He has a woman's number saved in his mobile, and her number he's saved her under is some sort of derogatory name about the appearance of her feet. And they eventually reveal that this woman in question is Lex Luthor's current girlfriend, who is being abused for the entire film. And yet they try to paint her out as just the butt of the joke, of being interested in Jimmy Olsen, even though he's very uncaring about being with her, and also uncaring about the fact that she is trapped in an abusive relationship. And Clark Kent's mother, Martha, she is treated as a one-dimensional punchline. When you meet her, they don't give her any meaningful material to make that introduction. She is reduced to an unfunny ageist joke that goes on far too long about how old people are so foolish for not knowing how to effectively speak on a mobile phone. Why is she speaking so loudly into the phone when she doesn't need to be speaking that loudly? So you want to mock older people for not being as tech savvy, but then you want to turn your iconic superhero lead into an overgrown man-child whose day can be ruined by a corny hashtag. And then at the very end of the film, when they are trying to affirm Superman's love for his Earth parents, because he is watching home videos of the three of them in the Fortress of Solitude. By the way, who was filming those? That did not make sense to me. You didn't give any sufficient time and space in the film to sit in emotionally intimate moments between him and his Earth parents. You instead turned their first phone call with each other into a joke that outstayed its welcome, instead of focusing on the depth of their love for one another as a family. You let him have one heart-to-heart with his father, but nothing of the sort with his mother, further proving the film's weird energy towards women at large, which is a talking point that could be longer, but we'll save that for Patreon. To summarize, my pull quote is as follows. This latest iteration of Superman fails to effectively develop the more complex socio-political topics it attempts to incorporate in its narrative. Despite standout performances from Anthony Carrigan, Edi Gathegi, and Maria Gabriela de Faria, those simply aren't enough to overcome the cliched dialogue for the leads, juvenile comedic interruptions that undermine any real dramatic tension, and the incessant objectification of numerous female characters throughout the ensemble. Final score, 1.5. Did I mention the cliched dialogue, by the way? Because Superman was trying to give a cliched speech to Lex Luthor like it was an after-school special direct to VHS in the middle of the climactic fight. And then Krypto was the only one ready to handle business when it needed to be handled.
Or we can straighten it out right here.
The next DC film in this era is Supergirl, and I will definitely need to see a trailer before I decide what my level of anticipation is for that. Right now, it's just very neutral. It's in the middle. I do find it fun, though, that David Krumholtz is playing her father. Do you know why? Because that's Michael Eckman.
Are you telling me I'm not a pretty guy?
He's very pretty.
Yeah,
This is a gorgeous guy.
I just wasn't sure. I didn't know.